Claire Sterling had been through one of those days that made her question why she'd decided to become a doctor in the first place. As a 30-year-old neurology resident at Chicago Metropolitan Hospital, she was used to long shifts, difficult cases, and chronic sleep deprivation. But this day had topped them all. First, a patient with a head injury had thrown up on her new white coat. Then the attending physician, Dr. Mason, had criticized her diagnosis in front of the entire team. And to top it off, as if fate wanted one last laugh, her car had refused to start in the hospital parking garage, forcing her to call a tow truck. It was after 9 o'clock when she finally arrived at Aurelia, an exclusive restaurant in the heart of downtown Chicago. Normally, she would never come here, not on a resident's salary, but today was a special occasion. Exactly 5 years ago, her father had lost his battle with glioblastoma. It was his illness that had inspired Claire to choose neurology. "I have a reservation under Sterling," she told the elegant maitre d', who gave her a look of faint surprise. In her simple black sweater and jeans, she didn't look like the restaurant's typical clientele. Her hair, usually pinned up meticulously, now fell loosely around her shoulders. "Yes, of course. Right this way," he replied, leading her through the dining room. Claire looked around. Crystal chandeliers, velvet-upholstered chairs, waiters in white gloves. Everything screamed expensive. But once a year she could afford the splurge. Her father had always said, "Claire, my dear, life is too short to eat bad food." The maitre d' stopped at a table in the back of the room. Claire sat down with a sigh of relief, not paying attention to the glass of red wine and a half-eaten plate of appetizers already on the table. She was so tired, she barely registered the details. "I'll have a glass of red wine. Anything, as long as it's good," she said to the waiter, who appeared instantly. She began to browse the menu when she suddenly felt someone's eyes on her. She lifted her head and froze. Sitting across from her was a man, tall, handsome, around 40, with intense blue eyes and dark hair streaked with silver. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that undoubtedly cost more than her monthly salary. "Excuse me, but I believe you're sitting at my table," he said calmly, with a slight smile. Claire felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I'm sorry. The maitre d' brought me here. I have a reservation." The man looked around, as if searching for an explanation. "Interesting. I have a reservation as well, under Davenport." "Sterling," Claire replied automatically. Just then, a flustered maitre d' rushed over. "My sincerest apologies. There's been a mistake. Miss Sterling, your table is by the window. This table is reserved for Mr. Davenport." Claire felt the fatigue and frustration of the entire day welling up inside her. She took a deep breath, ready to get up and move to the correct table, when the man suddenly raised his hand to stop her. "It's not a problem. You can stay," he said to her, then turned to the maitre d'. "Please prepare the table by the window for myself and Ms. Dr. Sterling," Claire finished, surprised. "For myself and Dr. Sterling," he finished with a confident smile. "And please open a bottle of the Chateau Margaux, 2010. The maitre d' gave a slight bow and walked away, leaving Claire in a state of complete shock. "What are you doing?" she asked, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. "Introducing myself, Carter Davenport," he said, extending his hand, "and inviting you to dinner." Claire hesitated but shook his hand. "Thank you, but I'd really prefer my own table. This is an important evening for me." Something in her voice must have betrayed the gravity of the situation, because Carter's smile softened slightly. "I understand. In that case, I apologize for my forwardness. Perhaps another time." He was about to stand up when Claire, not knowing why, said, "Unless—" She hesitated. "Unless you'd like to keep me company. I don't like eating alone." She was surprised by her own words. It wasn't like her to invite strange men to dinner, but there was something in his eyes that made her not want to end this evening by herself. Carter sat back down, a wide smile spreading across his face. "It would be my pleasure, Doctor." The waiter brought the wine and poured it into their glasses. Carter raised his in a toast. To chance encounters. Claire clinked her glass against his. To mistakes made by the maitre d'. They both laughed, and the tension between them began to dissolve. "So, you're a doctor?" Carter asked, taking a sip of wine. "Yes, a neurology resident. And you? What do you do, Mr. Davenport?" "I'm an entrepreneur, mostly in the tech industry." "That must be fascinating," Claire replied, though in truth she knew very little about business. Carter shrugged. "It has its ups and downs. Nothing as exciting as saving people's lives." Claire let out a quiet snort. "Today, the only thing I saved was my dignity, and even that's debatable. A patient threw up on my coat, my boss humiliated me, and my car broke down. It was as if the universe was telling me, 'Claire, just stay home.' And yet, here you are," Carter observed with interest. Claire toyed with her wineglass for a moment, wondering how much she could tell him. She didn't usually confide in strangers, but tonight she felt the need to share her story. "5 years ago, I lost my father. Brain cancer. Today is the anniversary of his death, and this was his favorite restaurant. I come here every year, order his favorite dish and raise a glass to his memory." Carter's expression grew serious. A shadow of understanding and compassion appeared in his eyes. "I'm very sorry for your loss. That's a beautiful tradition." "And you? What brings you to Aurelia in the middle of the week?" Claire asked, wanting to change the subject. Carter hesitated, as if weighing his answer. "I was celebrating the signing of a major contract. My company just secured funding for a new project. Medical equipment, as a matter of fact." "Medical equipment?" Claire's interest was piqued. "Yes, we're working on new solutions for diagnostic brain imaging, a technology that could detect tumors at a much earlier stage." Claire felt her heart beat faster. What a coincidence. That's incredible. If a technology like that had existed 5 years ago, maybe my father... She didn't finish the sentence, but Carter seemed to understand. "That's exactly why we're doing it. So that fewer families have to go through what you went through." They sat in silence for a long moment, a silence that wasn't awkward, but filled with a shared understanding. The waiter came to take their order. Claire chose the truffle risotto, her father's favorite. Carter decided on the steak. "So, Dr. Sterling..." "Claire, we can be on a first-name basis," she interrupted with a smile. "Claire," he repeated, as if savoring her name. "And I'm Carter. Tell me, what made you become a neurosurgeon?" "Neurologist, not neurosurgeon," she corrected him. "The difference is that I diagnose and treat, but I don't operate. And well, I originally wanted to be a pediatrician, but when my father got sick, I spent so much time reading about brain diseases. I wanted to understand what was happening to him. After he passed, I knew this was my path." Carter nodded in understanding. "And you?" she asked. "Did you always want to be an entrepreneur?" Carter chuckled softly. "No, I wanted to be a baseball player, but my mother insisted I finish college, economics, at Wharton. Then I started my first company, sold it for a profit, and it just went from there. Now I have a holding company with several tech firms." "A holding company," Claire repeated, raising her eyebrows. "Sounds serious." "It sounds boring," Carter replied with a smile. "Believe me, your job is far more interesting." "Yes, especially when patients are throwing up on my coat." They both laughed, and Claire felt the tension of the long day slowly melt away. There was something captivating about Carter. Despite his obvious confidence and wealth, he didn't seem arrogant. He listened to her with genuine interest. The waiter brought their food, and the conversation flowed on about favorite movies, books, places in Chicago. Claire couldn't remember the last time she'd had such a good time at dinner. "So, have you lived in Chicago your whole life?" Carter asked, finishing his steak. "Yes, I'm a Chicago native. My parents had an apartment in the Old Town Triangle. Now I live in Lincoln Park, closer to the hospital. You?" "I'm from Philadelphia, but I moved to Chicago for grad school and just stayed. Now I have a condo in the Gold Coast and a house on Lake Michigan. I like having a place to escape to when the city gets too overwhelming." A house on the lake, Claire repeated with a hint of irony in her voice. Of course, who doesn't have a house on the lake? Carter laughed, but she noticed a flicker of embarrassment on his face. Sorry, I didn't mean to brag. No, I'm sorry, she replied quickly. That was rude of me. It's just, our worlds are very different. Is that a bad thing? Carter asked, looking directly into her eyes. Claire felt her heart race at his gaze. No, it's interesting. The waiter cleared their empty plates and offered dessert. Claire was about to decline. The bill would be astronomical as it was, but Carter was already ordering a tiramisu for them to share. My father always said no dinner is complete without dessert, he said, after the waiter left. A wise man, your father, Claire replied with a smile. He was, Carter said quietly. He died when I was 22. Heart attack. I'm sorry, Claire said, instinctively touching his hand which was resting on the table. Carter didn't pull away. For a moment they sat like that, connected by the simple gesture and their shared experience of loss. The dessert arrived, breaking the moment. They ate in a comfortable silence, exchanging occasional smiles. When the waiter brought the check, Claire reached for her purse, but Carter shook his head firmly. Don't even think about it. I invited you, remember? Technically, I invited you, Claire countered. Technically, I'm the one who kept you at my table, he replied with a smile. Please, let me. Claire sighed but relented. Carter placed a credit card on the tray without even looking at the bill. Thank you for dinner, she said as they were leaving the restaurant, and for the company. It was an unusual night. For me too, Carter replied, stopping to face her on the sidewalk. Could I call you sometime? Maybe we could do this again. Claire hesitated. Carter was charming, intelligent, and clearly interested, but he was also a billionaire from another world. A world that seemed unattainable for someone like her. Her phone rang, interrupting the moment. She glanced at the screen. The hospital. Sorry, I have to take this, she said, stepping a few feet away. Dr. Sterling. It was the neurologist on call. The head trauma patient she had seen that morning had taken a sudden turn for the worse. They needed her immediately. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, ending the call. She returned to Carter with an apologetic look on her face. I have to go back to the hospital. An emergency. I understand, he replied, though she saw a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Let me at least get you a cab. Thanks, but that won't be necessary. The hospital isn't far, and at this hour it's faster to walk than sit in traffic. Carter nodded, then unexpectedly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a business card. My number, he said, handing her the small card. In case you want to do this again. Claire took the card, feeling her fingers brush against his. Thank you, Carter. But they stood in silence for a moment, as if neither of them wanted the evening to end. Good luck with your patient, he said finally. Thank you, and congratulations on the contract. Claire turned and started walking quickly toward the hospital. After a few yards, she glanced back over her shoulder. Carter was still standing in the same spot, watching her. She gave a small smile and a wave, then picked up her pace, her thoughts turning to the patient who was waiting for her. But somewhere in the back of her mind, between thoughts of intracranial bleeding symptoms and diagnostic procedures, was the memory of intense blue eyes and the warm smile of the man who wouldn't let her leave his table, and the business card she was clutching in her pocket as she ran through the hospital doors a few minutes later. 3 days later, Claire Sterling was sitting in the neurology residence lounge, fighting off drowsiness. She was in the middle of a 24-hour shift, and the clock on the wall showed 3 in the morning. In front of her was a cup of coffee, her 4th that night, and a stack of medical charts. Why don't you go get some sleep? It's quiet on the floor, said Anna Miller, a veteran nurse, poking her head into the lounge. I have to finish these reports, Claire replied, gesturing to the charts. The chief wants them on his desk by 8. Anna sighed disapprovingly. Dr. Mason is on your case again? That man must not remember what it's like to be a resident. Claire just shrugged. She didn't want to complain. even though she knew the chief of neurology was harder on her than on the other residents. Maybe because, as the only woman on the neurology team, she felt a constant need to prove herself. "I'm going to make a fresh pot of coffee. Want one?" Anna asked. "Please. Black as night and bitter as my professional life," Claire joked. When Anna left, Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the elegant business card. Carter Davenport, CEO, Davenport Tech Holdings. Below it was a phone number and an email address. She had pulled the card out multiple times over the past 3 days, wondering whether she should call. The dinner had been unexpectedly pleasant, and Carter was interesting, intelligent, handsome, with a good sense of humor, and clearly interested in her. But the more she thought about that night, the more surreal it seemed. She, a regular neurology resident with student loans to pay off, and an apartment she shared with a friend, didn't fit into the world of millionaires who ordered $1,000 bottles of wine. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of a phone. The hospital line, not her personal one. She picked it up immediately. "Dr. Sterling, neurology." "Doctor, we have a new patient in the ER. Male, 44, fell down the stairs, head trauma, loss of consciousness. CT shows an epidural hematoma. Neurosurgery is on the way, but we need an urgent neuroconsult." "I'm on my way," Claire replied, standing up and slipping the business card back into her pocket. Carter Davenport would have to wait. Right now there were more important things. 2 hours later, Claire returned to the lounge, exhausted but satisfied. The patient was already in the operating room, and she had managed to perform a full neurological exam and establish a preliminary prognosis. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Wallace, had praised her quick diagnosis. She sat back down at her desk, trying to finish the paperwork before her shift ended. But fatigue was winning. Her eyes kept closing. "Maybe you should lie down after all," Anna said, returning with the coffee. "You look like a zombie." "Thanks for the compliment," Claire mumbled, taking the mug. "But I really have to finish this." Her phone buzzed, signaling a new message. Thinking it was the ER with an update on her patient, Claire reached for it. But it was her personal phone, and the number was unknown. "Hi, Claire. It's Carter Davenport. I hope your patient is doing well. I was wondering if we could get coffee sometime when you have a free moment." "Best, see." Claire stared at the screen, stunned. How did he get her number? She was sure she hadn't given it to him at dinner. As if reading her mind, another message came through. "P.S. Sorry for being so forward. I got your number from a friend who's on the hospital's board of directors. I hope you don't mind." Claire felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was something charming about his determination. On the other, wasn't it a little unsettling, using his connections to get her private number? "Good news?" Anna asked, noticing her expression. "I don't know," Claire answered honestly. "Remember that dinner I went to on the anniversary of my dad's death? The one you rushed back to the hospital from in the middle of the night? Hard to forget. You were practically glowing even though you had a tough case waiting for you." "Really?" Claire was surprised. She hadn't realized her mood had been so obvious. "Like the sun. So, what's up?" Claire sighed and showed Anna the message. "Oh!" Anna's eyes widened. "Carter Davenport? The Carter Davenport? The owner of Davenport Tech Holdings? You know him?" Now it was Claire's turn to be surprised. "Not personally. But who doesn't know Chicago's most eligible bachelor? He's in the news all the time. His company is working on some groundbreaking medical device, if I remember correctly. He mentioned something about technology for early detection of brain tumors," Claire recalled. "So, he asked you on a date?" "For coffee," Claire corrected her. "It's not the same thing." "In his world, that's probably a date," Anna said with a meaningful smile. "So, are you going to text him back?" Claire hesitated. The whole situation felt so far removed from her daily life. But wasn't that the point? To break out of the routine, to experience something new? "Maybe," she finally replied. "But first, I have to finish this paperwork and survive the rest of this shift. And then you'll get some sleep and text him back with a clear head," Anna advised. "Trust me, you don't want to be making these kinds of decisions after being on your feet for 20 hours. Claire nodded, putting her phone away. Anna was right. Work first, then pleasure. Even if that pleasure came in the form of Chicago's wealthiest bachelor. When Claire left the hospital after her shift, the sun was already high in the sky. She was exhausted, but pleased. The paperwork was done on time, and the patient with the hematoma had survived surgery and had a good prognosis. The drive to her apartment in Lincoln Park took almost an hour. Chicago traffic was unforgiving, even midweek. When she finally got home, all she wanted was a shower and her bed. Her roommate Maya was in the kitchen with a mug of coffee and her laptop. "You look like you've been through a war," she greeted her cheerfully. "Thanks," Claire grumbled, dropping her bag on a chair. "Tough shift." "Coffee? No, thanks. I think I've already had a gallon. I just need sleep." Claire started toward her room, but stopped in the doorway. "Maya, do you know who Carter Davenport is?" Maya raised her eyebrows. "The tech billionaire? Only from the papers. Why?" Claire hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to share the story, but Maya was her best friend since college. "I had dinner with him." Maya nearly spit out her coffee. "What? When? How?" "On Monday, at Aurelia. It's a long story, but long story short, the waiter seated me at his table by mistake, and he wouldn't let me leave." "And? What's he like? Arrogant? Conceited?" "Quite the opposite," Claire said, surprised by her own reaction. "He was nice, normal, even funny." Maya stared at her in disbelief. "And you didn't mention this for 3 days." "I've been busy, and honestly, I thought it was a one-time thing, but—" Claire pulled out her phone and showed Maya the message. "Oh my God!" Maya jumped up from her chair. "You have to text him back, right now." "I'm exhausted, Maya. I haven't slept in 24 hours. I'd rather reply when I can form a coherent sentence." "Dan, I think you should reply now before you change your mind. Knowing you, you'll start overthinking it, come up with a million reasons why it's a bad idea, and end up never texting him at all." Claire sighed, knowing Maya was right. She did have a tendency to overanalyze everything. "Fine. What should I write?" "Something simple. Hi, thanks for the message. I'd love to get coffee. How's Friday afternoon for you?" Claire thought about it. Friday was her first day off after a long stretch of shifts. "All right," she finally agreed, typing out the message and hitting send before she could change her mind. The reply came almost instantly. "Friday sounds great. How about 4 o'clock? There's a place on the Riverwalk, the Riverbend Cafe. Know it?" Claire knew it. It was a small, cozy cafe with a view of the Chicago River. She hadn't expected someone like Carter Davenport to know such unassuming places. "I do. 4 works perfectly. See you Friday." She sent the message and put her phone down, feeling a strange flutter of excitement despite her fatigue. "Well," Maya prompted, "we're meeting on Friday at 4 at the Riverbend Cafe." Maya clapped her hands in excitement. "That place is so romantic, perfect for a date." "It's not a date," Claire protested. "It's just coffee." "Sure, and I'm the Queen of England." Maya laughed. "Go get some sleep. You need to be well rested for your not a date." Claire shook her head with a smile and headed to her room. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe it was a date. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad idea. Friday arrived faster than she expected. After 2 days of rest, Claire felt like a new person. She spent the morning cleaning the apartment and catching up on medical literature. In the afternoon, she stood in front of her closet, wondering what to wear. It's just coffee, she told herself, not a date. She didn't need to get dressed up. On the other hand, she didn't want to look like she'd just rolled out of bed, especially compared to Carter, who wore a perfectly tailored suit even to a restaurant. She finally settled on a simple blue sundress, a white cardigan, and comfortable flats. She tied her hair into a loose ponytail and put on minimal makeup, just mascara and lip gloss. "You look beautiful," Maya commented, as Claire emerged from her room. "For a not a date." "Oh, shut up," Claire replied, but she couldn't suppress a smile. The Riverbend Cafe was located in a restored building on the Riverwalk, with a patio overlooking the water. The place was cozy, with wooden tables, soft couches, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air. Claire arrived a few minutes early, but Carter was already there. He was sitting at a table on the patio, dressed much more casually than last time, in dark jeans and a navy sweater. He looked younger and less formal. When he saw her, he stood up with a smile. "Claire, good to see you." "You too," she replied, walking over to the table. She was surprised when Carter leaned in and gave her a light kiss on the cheek. She caught the scent of his cologne, subtle, with a hint of sandalwood. "I already ordered. I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to 2 mugs on the table. "A latte for you. I figured after so many hours at the hospital, you might need something gentler than an espresso." Claire was surprised by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. How did you know?" Carter shrugged with a smile. "Intuition. Plus, I drink inhuman amounts of coffee myself when I have long days at work." They sat down at the table. The patio offered a view of the Chicago River and its iconic bridges. It was a beautiful, sunny day, one of the last of the year before the chilly Chicago autumn set in. "How's your patient?" Carter asked after a moment. "The one you had to rush back for after our dinner." Claire was touched that he remembered. "He's doing well. We managed to stabilize him. It was a tough case, but he's going to pull through." "That must be satisfying," Carter remarked, "knowing you helped save someone's life." "It's the best part of my job," Claire admitted. "Though sometimes it's hard to remember the good moments when you've just finished a 24-hour shift and a patient you tried to save dies anyway." Carter nodded in understanding. "Business has its ups and downs too, but the stakes are incomparably smaller. The worst I can do is lose money, not a life. Unless your medical technology actually works," Claire pointed out. "Then you'll be saving more lives than I ever could as a single doctor." Carter looked at her with interest. "I hadn't thought of it that way. That's an inspiring perspective." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and watching the tour boats glide by on the river. "So," Claire began, wanting to break the silence, "how did you manage to get my number?" Carter looked slightly sheepish. "Sorry about that. One of the hospital's board members, Dr. Newman, is an old friend of mine. Our company made a significant donation to the neurology department last year, so we have connections." "A donation?" Claire raised her eyebrows. "Is that why the chief is always talking about the new equipment we're supposedly getting soon?" "Possibly." Carter smiled innocently. "But I swear I didn't know you existed when we made that donation. It was pure coincidence." "Coincidence?" Claire didn't look convinced. "The waiter just happened to seat me at your table, and you just happened to have donated to my specific department." "Do you believe in fate?" Carter asked with a twinkle in his eye. "I believe in statistical probability and chains of cause and effect," Claire replied. "I'm a neurologist, remember? Our brains love to see patterns where there are none. Or maybe sometimes the patterns are really there, and we just fail to see them," Carter pressed. "Maybe chance encounters aren't as random as they seem." Claire shook her head with a smile. "Now you sound like my mother. She believes everything happens for a reason, and you don't. As I said, I believe in science. In medicine, there's no room for fate. There's a diagnosis, treatment, and sometimes luck." Carter watched her, fascinated. "You're a remarkable woman, Claire Sterling." Claire felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She wasn't used to such direct compliments. "Why do you say that?" "Most people I know agree with me just for the sake of it. You're not afraid to have your own opinion. It's no big deal," she shrugged. "I'm just being myself." "And that's precisely what's remarkable," Carter replied, looking her straight in the eye. "In my world, authenticity is a rare commodity." Claire felt a strange warmth spread through her at his gaze. This was irrational, she told herself. She barely knew this man. And yet, so, she changed the subject. "Tell me more about this technology you're working on. What is it exactly?" Carter's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. It's a system that uses artificial intelligence to analyze diagnostic images. It can detect cancerous changes at a much earlier stage than traditional methods. Right now, we're focusing on glioblastomas, but eventually, the technology could be applied to various types of brain tumors. That sounds revolutionary, Claire admitted. But how exactly does it work? AI is one thing, but what parameters are you analyzing? Carter looked pleasantly surprised by her technical question. Well, the system analyzes subtle changes in tissue density, blood flow, and metabolite levels that the human eye might miss. We use data from magnetic resonance imaging and MR spectroscopy, combining them into one cohesive picture. MR spectroscopy, Claire pondered. That makes sense. Choline and N-acetylaspartate levels can indicate early metabolic changes in tissue before a visible tumor appears. Exactly! Carter was clearly excited by her understanding. Most of the investors I talk to fall asleep during these technical details. Well, most investors don't spend their days reading studies on brain metabolism, Claire noted with a smile. True, Carter admitted. But that's why this conversation is so refreshing. You understand what I'm talking about, and you see the value in what we're doing. Of course I see the value. This could save countless lives. Early detection is the key factor in treating brain tumors. Carter looked at her for a moment in silence, as if considering something. Claire, I have a proposal, he said finally. My company is hosting a small conference next week for potential investors and medical partners. We'll be presenting a prototype of our technology. I'd like you to come as my guest. Claire was taken aback. Me? But I'm just a resident. I'm not an expert or... You're exactly who we need, Carter interrupted. We need the opinions of doctors who will actually be using this technology in the future. Not just professors with titles, but frontline practitioners. Claire thought about it. On one hand, the offer was intriguing. On the other, is this your way of asking me out again? She asked directly. Carter laughed. You saw right through me, he admitted. But it really is an important event for my company, and I really would like you to be there, both as a physician and as my guest. Claire felt her heart speed up. That sounded a lot like a date. When exactly is this conference? Wednesday evening. At the Peninsula Hotel, there will be a dinner, a presentation, and then a small reception. I know you have a busy schedule at the hospital, but Wednesday is my day off, Claire interrupted. Theoretically, I could make it. Carter's face lit up with a smile. That's wonderful. I'll pick you up around 6, if that works for you. You'll pick me up? Claire raised her eyebrows. You don't have to. I can get there on my own. Please, let me, Carter insisted. It's part of the pleasure. Claire hesitated, but finally nodded. All right, but I should warn you, I have nothing appropriate to wear for an occasion like that. My wardrobe consists mainly of jeans and scrubs. Carter waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about the dress code. It's a business event, not a royal ball. But Claire could see in his eyes that he didn't quite understand. To him, a business event probably meant $1,000 suits and evening gowns. For her, it was uncharted territory. I'll have to borrow something from Maya, she mumbled, more to herself than to him. Who's Maya? Carter asked, catching her words. My roommate and best friend. She works in an ad agency and has a much better wardrobe than I do. Ah, Carter nodded in understanding. So you share an apartment? Claire looked at him with slight amusement. Of course, I can't afford to rent an apartment in Chicago by myself on a residence salary. Besides, I like the company. I live alone, Carter said. Sometimes it's quiet. There was something in his voice that made Claire look at him more closely. For a moment, she saw not a successful businessman, but just a man who was perhaps lonely in his luxury condo. Quiet can be both a blessing and a curse, she said softly. After a 24-hour shift in a noisy hospital, silence sounds like heaven. But after a few days, it starts to get overwhelming. Carter looked at her with a strange expression, as if she had just voiced his deepest thoughts. "Exactly," he said quietly. "That's exactly how it is." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee and looking at the river. Claire felt as if she had just broken through a layer, touching something more authentic in Carter. "So," she said finally, "Wednesday at 6. Where should I meet you?" "Give me your address and I'll come by," Carter offered. Claire hesitated. Giving her address to a man she barely knew was perhaps not the wisest idea. On the other hand, this was Carter Davenport, a man whose face appeared in magazines and whose company worked with her hospital. He wasn't a random stranger. "All right," she finally agreed, giving him her address in Lincoln Park. "Great," Carter smiled. "I can't wait." Claire smiled back, feeling a strange excitement at the thought of the upcoming evening. This was all so far removed from her daily life. Exclusive hotels, business conferences, handsome millionaires asking her on dates. But maybe this was exactly what she needed. Something to pull her out of the routine of shifts, medical charts, and the struggle for recognition in the male-dominated world of neurology. "Me too," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made Carter look at her with a new kind of intensity. They talked for almost another hour, moving from professional topics to more personal ones. Claire told him about medical school and her dreams of becoming a top neurologist, while Carter shared stories about the early days of his company and the failures that had preceded his success. When they finally stood up to say goodbye, Carter kissed her on the cheek again, his hand resting on her arm for a moment. The small gesture sent an electric shiver down her spine. On her way home, Claire couldn't stop thinking about the conference on Wednesday and how a random waiter's mistake at Aurelia might just change the course of her life. Because even though her rational, neurological mind resisted the thought, she was beginning to believe that maybe Carter was right, and their meeting hadn't been as random as she first thought. Wednesday came faster than Claire had expected. The past few days had been consumed by work at the hospital, but the thought of the conference and seeing Carter again never left her, even during the most intense shifts. "You look like a princess," Maya commented, as Claire emerged from the bathroom in a borrowed burgundy dress that fell just to her knees. It was elegant, but not overly formal, perfect for the occasion. "Don't exaggerate," Claire replied, though she had to admit she was surprised by her own reflection. With her hair swept up in an elegant bun and subtle makeup, she looked completely different from her everyday self. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Maya jumped up with excitement and ran to open it before Claire could react. "You must be Carter," she heard her friend's voice. "I'm Maya, Claire's roommate. Come on in. She'll be ready in a second." Claire took a deep breath, grabbed a small clutch, and walked out of her room. Carter was standing in the entryway, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. At the sight of her, his eyes widened slightly. "You look stunning," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. "You look very handsome as well." Carter smiled and extended his arm. "Ready?" Claire nodded, ignoring Maya's meaningful glance. "Ready." The Peninsula was one of the most luxurious hotels in Chicago. As Claire and Carter walked into the enormous conference hall, she immediately felt intimidated. Crystal chandeliers sparkled everywhere, and elegantly dressed guests sipped champagne from tall flutes. "Nervous?" Carter asked quietly, as a waiter handed them glasses. "A little," she admitted honestly. "This isn't my natural habitat." "Mine neither," he replied with a smile. "Believe it or not, I prefer my office and working on projects to all this business formality." Before she could reply, an older man in glasses approached them. "Carter, there you are," he said, shaking Carter's hand. "And I see you're not alone. Professor Kowalski, meet Dr. Claire Sterling, a neurologist from Chicago Metropolitan Hospital," Carter introduced her. "Claire, this is Professor Adam Kowalski, one of our key scientific advisors." "A pleasure to meet you, Professor," Claire said, shaking his hand. "I've read your research on glioblastoma biomarkers. It was very inspiring. The professor looked at her with new interest. Really? It's rare to meet a young doctor who keeps up with the latest scientific literature. Dr. Sterling is exceptional in many ways, Carter said, a note of pride in his voice that made Claire's heart skip a beat. For the next hour, Claire was introduced to one important figure after another. Investors, doctors, scientists. To her own surprise, she handled it beautifully, engaging in substantive discussions about neurology and medical technology. Carter stayed close by her side, and whenever their hands accidentally brushed, she felt an electric thrill. Finally, it was time for the main presentation. Carter excused himself and went up on stage. He stood at the microphone, exuding a confidence that was completely different from his more relaxed demeanor when they were alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice filling the room, "welcome to the presentation of a breakthrough technology that could change the face of neurological diagnostics. Our AI system for the early detection of brain tumors is the result of 5 years of intensive research and collaboration with the best specialists in the field." Claire listened with growing admiration as Carter confidently presented the technical aspects of the project, answered tough questions, and won over skeptical investors. This was a completely different man from the one who had sat with her in a cozy cafe on the Riverwalk 2 days ago. After the presentation, the reception began. Carter quickly found Claire in the crowd. "So, how did it go?" he asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice. "You were amazing," she answered honestly. "I didn't think anyone could talk about AI algorithms so engagingly." Carter laughed, visibly relaxing. "That's thanks to the subject, not me, but I'm glad you didn't fall asleep." "Are you kidding? This could be a revolution in neurology." Claire was genuinely excited. Imagine how many lives could be saved if... They were interrupted by the ringing of Carter's phone. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I'm sorry. I have to take this. It's important," he said, stepping aside. Claire was left alone, looking around the room. She felt a bit out of place among all these important people. She decided to walk over to the buffet when someone suddenly touched her arm. "Dr. Sterling?" She heard a woman's voice. She turned to see an elegant woman in her 40s, wearing a black dress and a string of pearls. "Yes, that's me," she replied, wondering how the woman knew her name. "I'm Alexandra Wallace, director of the Health Plus Foundation," the woman introduced herself. "I hear you're here with Carter Davenport." "Yes, he invited me as his guest," Claire explained, feeling strangely scrutinized by the woman's gaze. "Fascinating," Alexandra said with a faint smile. "Carter usually comes to these events alone. You must be someone special." Claire didn't know how to respond. Was that a compliment or a subtle attempt to dig for information? "We're friends," she said finally. "Of course." Alexandra's smile widened. "In any case, it was a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Sterling. I'm sure we'll see each other again." She walked away, leaving Claire with the feeling that she had just gone through some kind of incomprehensible test. Before she had time to think about it, Carter returned. "Sorry about that," he said. "A crisis at one of our subsidiaries in Asia. Sometimes I forget about the time difference." "It's fine," Claire replied. "I just met Alexandra Wallace." Carter's face tensed slightly. "Alex? What did she say to you?" "Not much. She seemed curious about my being here." Carter sighed. "Alexandra is an old acquaintance and a former business partner." Something in his tone suggested their relationship was more complicated than a simple business partnership. Claire felt a pang of jealousy, which was ridiculous. They weren't a couple. "I see," she said in a neutral tone. Carter looked at her carefully. "Sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound mysterious. Alex and I were together for a while, but that ended years ago. We're just friends now." Claire nodded, not quite sure how to feel about that. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," she said. "We all have a past." Carter smiled in relief. "You're right, but I'd rather focus on the present," he said, his gaze intense. "Specifically on you." Claire felt her heart speed up. This was all happening so fast. 2 weeks ago, she didn't even know Carter Davenport existed, and now he was standing in front of her at an exclusive reception, looking at her as if she were the only person in the room. "Carter, she began, not quite sure what she wanted to say. "Excuse me, Mr. Davenport," one of the organizers interrupted. "The investors from Germany would like a word with you." Carter looked torn. "I'll be right there," he replied, then turned to Claire. "I have to deal with this, but I don't want you to be bored. Maybe you'd like to come back to my place after the reception. I could show you more details of the project." Claire hesitated. This wasn't just a business reception, it was a date, and now Carter was inviting her to his home. Part of her wanted to say yes, to follow this intense feeling that was growing between them. But another part, the sensible, analytical neurologist part, warned her that this was all happening too fast. I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said finally. "I have an early shift at the hospital tomorrow." Carter nodded, not hiding his disappointment. "Of course, I understand. Maybe another time." "Maybe another time," Claire agreed with a small smile. Carter looked at her for another moment, as if he wanted to say more, but in the end he just squeezed her hand lightly. "Wait for me. I'll try to be back as soon as I can," he said, before walking off toward a group of men in suits. Claire watched as Carter moved effortlessly among the investors, laughing at the right moments, gesturing with natural elegance. He was in his element, confident, charismatic, the center of attention. Standing alone with her glass of champagne, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that their worlds were too different. He, a successful businessman, moving freely among the elite. She, an ordinary resident whose biggest worry was whether she would finish her medical charts before the end of her shift. And yet, when Carter glanced at her from across the room, she saw something in his eyes that contradicted that difference. Something that said that maybe, just maybe, these two different worlds could come together after all. A week had passed since the conference, and Claire and Carter saw each other almost every day. Despite her hectic shift schedule, Claire found time for quick coffee dates, walks along the Riverwalk, or dinners at cozy restaurants. With each passing day, she felt the barrier between their worlds slowly blurring. "I never expected a guy who drives a Porsche to prefer food truck tacos to molecular gastronomy," Claire joked, as they sat on a bench in Lincoln Park, eating tacos from a nearby truck. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me," Carter replied with a mysterious smile, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "For instance, as a student, I worked at a taco truck in Pilsen to make extra money." "You're kidding!" Claire couldn't believe it. "I swear, for my entire sophomore year of undergrad, to this day, I still remember the recipe for the garlic crema." Claire laughed, and Carter watched her with affection. In moments like these, she forgot all the differences between them. His wealth, her long shifts, their disparate worlds. But reality had a way of intruding at the most unexpected times, like when a passerby recognized Carter during a walk through the Old Town Triangle and asked for a photo, or when his phone would ring in the middle of the night because of a crisis at a company branch in Singapore. One evening, they were sitting in Claire's apartment, watching a movie on her laptop. Maya was away on a business trip, so they had the place to themselves. Claire rested her head on Carter's shoulder, feeling safe and content in his arms. "I have to tell you something," Carter said suddenly, pausing the movie. "Sounds serious," Claire replied, sitting up to look him in the eye. "It is serious," he nodded. "My company has been invited to participate in an international research project. It's a huge opportunity, but it requires me to be in Boston for several months." Claire felt a knot form in her stomach. "When are you leaving?" she asked quietly. "In 2 weeks," Carter replied, his eyes locked on hers. "And I want you to come with me." Claire froze. That was the last thing she had expected. "What, but how? I have my residency. I can't just—" "I know it's crazy," Carter interrupted, "but there are great hospitals in Boston. I could help you arrange an internship, a temporary work permit. It would be good for your career." Claire got up and started pacing nervously around the room. It sounded like a dream, Boston, Harvard Medical School, the best neurosurgery departments in the world. But, Carter, we've only known each other for a month, she said, stopping in front of him. This is all happening so fast. Carter stood up too and came over to her, taking her hands in his. I know, and I'll understand if you need time to think. But Claire, he hesitated. I'm in love with you. I wasn't planning on it, I wasn't looking for it, but it happened. And I know it's too soon, I know it's crazy, but I can't imagine leaving without you. Claire felt her heart pound. No one had ever said things like that to her. No one had ever looked at her the way Carter was looking at her now. I have feelings for you too, she admitted quietly. But Carter, my life is here. My residency, my patients, my family. I understand, he said, and a shadow of disappointment crossed his eyes. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Think about it. Talk to your chief resident. See if you could take a research leave or transfer part of your residency. In the meantime, I'll gather more information about opportunities in Boston. Claire nodded, trying to sort through her thoughts. Her rational medical mind was screaming that this was insane, to drop everything for a relationship that was only a month old. But another part of her, the part that felt electric shivers every time Carter touched her, was saying something completely different. Okay, she finally agreed. I'll think about it. Carter smiled in relief and pulled her into his arms. That's all I ask, he said, kissing her gently. Claire returned the kiss, but her mind was already far away. In Boston, in Chicago, in a future that had suddenly become both uncertain and exhilarating. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster for Claire. On one hand, the prospect of moving to Boston with Carter was exciting. On the other, it was terrifying. She talked to her chief, Dr. Mason, who, to her surprise, wasn't entirely against the idea. Harvard Medical School? He repeated when she presented her situation. That could be a valuable experience, but you have to realize that your residency will be extended by the time you spend abroad. I understand, Claire nodded. But is it even possible? Formally? It's possible, yes, Dr. Mason admitted. Difficult, but possible. I'd have to talk to the dean and the national consultant, but he looked at her searchingly. Are you sure this is a good idea, Claire? To go to the other side of the country for someone you've known for such a short time? It was the same question Claire had been asking herself every day. And every day the answer was different. Maya predictably was thrilled about the whole situation. It's like a romantic movie, she gushed. The handsome billionaire is sweeping you off to Boston. Of course you should go. Claire's mother was more skeptical. Honey, I know it's exciting, but isn't this a bit rushed? She asked over the phone. You don't know this man. Maybe he should meet your family first. And so he did. On Sunday, Carter joined Claire for a family dinner. To her relief, he quickly won over her mother and younger brother with his charm, sincerity, and his obvious affection for Claire. He's really in love with you, her mother said as they were doing the dishes. You can see it in the way he looks at you. I know, Claire replied quietly. And it scares me. Why? Her mother asked with concern. Because I think I'm falling in love with him too. And this is all happening so fast. Her mother took her hands, still wet from the dishwater. Claire, look at me. I know you. You've always been cautious, always analyzed everything. Maybe this time you should just trust your heart. Claire smiled through her tears. Dad would have said that, wouldn't he? He absolutely would have, her mother nodded. He always said you were too serious, too rational. Our little Dr. Claire, that's what he always called you. The memory of her father was like a warm ray of sunshine. Claire knew that if he were alive, he would tell her to be brave, to take a chance, to give love a chance. That evening, when they returned to Claire's apartment, she had made her decision. I'll go with you, she told Carter as they sat on the couch drinking tea. To Boston. I'll try to arrange a research leave or an internship. I don't know if it will work out, but I want to try. Carter's face lit up with a smile she had never seen before, one of pure, unadulterated joy. Really? He asked, as if he couldn't believe it. Really? Claire confirmed. I still think it's insane, but I want to be with you, Carter, and I want to give us a chance, no matter where it leads." Carter took her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Claire felt her last doubts melt away. It was insane, yes, but it was also the most right she had ever felt about anything. Later, as she lay in his arms, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, she thought about all the events that had led her to this moment. The chance meeting in the restaurant, the coffee on the Riverwalk, the reception at the hotel. Her initial mistrust and how slowly, day by day, Carter had won her heart. And now she was about to fly with him to the other side of the country, to Boston, a city she had never been to, a place she didn't know. It was crazy, but for the first time in her life, Claire Sterling was ready for a little bit of crazy. Because sometimes, she thought, holding Carter tighter, the best diagnoses don't come from analyzing symptoms, but from listening to your heart. Boston greeted them with rain. Droplets streaked across the taxi windows, blurring the view of the city as they drove from Logan Airport to the apartment Carter's company had rented for them in Back Bay, an elegant neighborhood in the heart of the city. "This is where we'll be living?" Claire asked as the taxi stopped in front of a beautiful red brick brownstone. "Yes, for now at least," Carter replied, helping the driver with their luggage. "If we stay longer, we can look for something more permanent." The last 2 weeks in Chicago had been a blur. Claire had sorted out all the paperwork for her research leave, said goodbye to her colleagues at the hospital, and packed her life into 2 suitcases. Dr. Mason, to her surprise, had not only approved her leave, but had even helped her get in touch with a neurologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the best hospitals in Boston, where she was set to do a 3-month rotation. The apartment was spacious and elegant, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a view of the Charles River. Claire stood by the window, watching the rain and trying to get used to the idea that this was her home now. "Do you like it?" Carter asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "It's beautiful," she answered honestly, "but a little unreal, like I'm in a dream." Carter gently turned her to face him. "It's not a dream, Claire. We're here, together, and I promise we'll do everything to make you happy here." He pulled her close and kissed her tenderly. Claire returned the kiss, but deep down she felt a flicker of anxiety. Everything was happening so fast. 2 months ago she didn't even know Carter, and now she was living with him in a luxury apartment in Boston, thousands of miles from home. "You start at the lab tomorrow?" she asked, pulling back slightly. "Yes, I have to be in early. And you? When is your meeting at the hospital?" "On Wednesday. Dr. Reynolds, the chief of neurology, agreed to see me." "That's great," Carter smiled broadly. "You'll see, everything will be fine. Boston is a wonderful city, and you'll get to work with the best neurologists in the world." Claire nodded, trying to share his enthusiasm. She knew it was a huge professional opportunity, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spinning out of her control. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not good enough for Mass General? What if your project doesn't succeed? What then, Carter?" Carter looked at her seriously. "Then we'll go back to Chicago. Or we'll go somewhere else. I'm with you because you're you, Claire, not because you're in Boston. I'm with you because I love you, and that won't change, no matter how my project or your rotation goes." His words were a comfort, but they didn't completely erase her fears. Yet as she lay in his arms that night, in a strange bed in a strange city, she knew one thing for certain. As long as they were together, she could face any challenge. The first few weeks in Boston were both fascinating and exhausting for Claire. Massachusetts General Hospital was everything she had dreamed of. State-of-the-art equipment, world-class specialists, patients with the most complex neurological cases. Dr. Reynolds, a senior neurologist with grey hair and a warm smile, took her under his wing, letting her assist on difficult cases and participate in experimental therapies. At the same time, living with Carter in Boston was completely different from their time in Chicago. There, they had met between her shifts and his business meetings. Every encounter was special, every moment together precious. Here, they lived together, sharing the day-to-day, breakfast, dinners, bills, chores. And while Claire loved waking up next to Carter every morning, she also began to notice differences in their lifestyles that hadn't been as apparent in Chicago. Carter worked almost constantly, often late into the night, consumed by his project. She, used to the clearly defined hours of her shifts, needed more of a balance between work and rest. "Maybe we could drive out to the ocean this weekend," she suggested one evening as Carter sat at his laptop, working on another presentation. "I hear Cape Cod is beautiful this time of year." Carter looked up from his screen as if just noticing her presence. "This weekend?" He frowned. "I have a meeting with investors on Saturday morning, but maybe we could go in the afternoon. We could be back by Sunday evening." Claire smiled in relief. She needed this, a moment just for them, away from work, the hospital, the lab, a moment to remember why she had come here. Saturday afternoon was sunny and warm, perfect for a trip to the coast. They rented a car and drove to the small town of Provincetown at the very tip of Cape Cod. Claire was enchanted by the charming wooden houses, colourful shops, and above all, the white sand beaches and turquoise water. "This is like a postcard," she said, taking off her shoes and stepping onto the sand. Carter smiled, seeing her joy. He also seemed more relaxed than he had been in weeks. He took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and took her hand. "Let's walk along the beach," he suggested. "I hear there's a lighthouse at the end." They strolled along the shore, talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company like they used to. Claire told him about her patients at the hospital, about the new diagnostic techniques she was learning. Carter shared his project's progress, the difficulties with investors, his plans for the future. "You know," he said at one point, stopping to look at the horizon, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that waiter hadn't seated you at my table that night. I'd probably still be working shifts in Chicago, and you'd still be eating lonely dinners at expensive restaurants," Claire replied with a smile. "And we never would have met," Carter added, turning to her. "That's a terrifying thought." "Terrifying?" Claire was surprised. "Yes," Carter nodded, "because now that I know you, I can't imagine my life without you." Claire felt her heart pound. Despite all the difficulties, the distance from home, the differences between them, she knew she felt the same way. "Me neither," she admitted quietly. Carter pulled her close and kissed her, and Claire returned the kiss, tasting the salt on his lips. They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other's arms, with the ocean waves at their feet and seagulls circling overhead. "We should head back," Carter said finally, glancing at his watch. "We have a dinner reservation." The restaurant was on a pier overlooking the bay. It was cozy and elegant, with wooden tables, candles, and panoramic windows that offered a stunning view of the sunset over the ocean. "This reminds me of our first dinner," Claire remarked as the waiter brought their wine. "Except this time no one is at the wrong table." Carter laughed, raising his glass. "To that waiter's mistake," he said, "the luckiest mistake of my life." They clinked glasses, and Claire felt that warm feeling she always got around Carter spread through her. After dinner, they walked through the town, browsing small art galleries and souvenir shops. They bought ice cream and sat on a bench by the marina, watching the boats bobbing on the water. "Claire," Carter said suddenly, putting down his ice cream cup, "there's something I wanted to talk to you about." The tone of his voice made Claire freeze. He sounded serious, almost nervous. "What is it?" she asked, putting her own ice cream down. Carter took a deep breath. "I received an offer from one of the investors. They want me to stay in Boston permanently to oversee the project's development. It would be for at least 2, maybe 3 years. Claire felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "And what did you say?" "I said I had to discuss it with you," Carter replied, looking her straight in the eye. "Because this isn't just my decision, Claire. It's about our future together." Claire looked away, gazing at the ocean. 2 or 3 years in Boston. That was much longer than they had planned. What about her residency in Chicago? What about her mother, her brother? What about the life she had left behind? You don't have to answer now, Carter added quickly, seeing her hesitation. I have until the end of the month. Just think about it. Claire nodded, trying to process it all. What about your company in Chicago, she asked. What about Davenport Tech Holdings? The board is managing things well. I could fly to Chicago once a month for meetings, and maybe you could come back then too, to visit your family and friends. It sounded reasonable, but Claire knew it wasn't that simple. Her professional life was in Chicago, her residency, her patients, but on the other hand, working at Mass General was an incredible opportunity. And most importantly, there was Carter. I'll think about it, she said finally. It's a big decision. Carter nodded gravely. I know, and I'll understand if you decide you want to go back to Chicago. We could try a long-distance relationship. But Claire could see in his eyes that he didn't believe in that solution. And frankly, neither did she. After these months of living together, sharing every day, how could they go back to occasional video calls? I love you, Carter, she said quietly. But this isn't an easy decision. I know, he replied, squeezing her hand. And that's why I wanted to be honest with you. Because you're the most important person in my life, Claire. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. That night, in their hotel room overlooking the ocean, Claire lay awake for a long time, listening to the steady breathing of the man sleeping beside her. She thought about Chicago, her hospital, her friends, and about Boston, Mass General, the opportunities that were opening up for her. But most of all, she thought about the man sleeping next to her, about his love, about their future together. She wasn't sure what she should do, but she knew one thing: the decision she made would change her life forever. Looking out the window at the moon reflecting on the ocean, Claire realized she was facing an ocean of possibilities. And no matter which path she chose, the most important thing was to stay true to herself. Because only by being honest with herself could she be honest with Carter. And their love, whether it bloomed in Boston or in Chicago, deserved that honesty. A month had passed since their weekend on Cape Cod. A month filled with dilemmas, conversations, and deep thought. Claire sat on the terrace of their apartment, sipping her morning coffee and gazing at the Boston skyline. The city was slowly waking up. Cars filled the streets, people hurried to work. The sun glinted off the glass facades of skyscrapers. "What are you thinking about?" Carter came out onto the terrace, carrying his own coffee mug. He was already dressed in a suit, ready for work. "About the decision," Claire answered honestly. "Today's the last day, isn't it? You have to give the investors your answer." Carter sighed and sat down next to her. "Yes, but Claire, I don't want you to feel pressured. If you need more time—" "No," she interrupted. "No more putting it off. I've made my decision." Carter sat up straighter, a look of anxious hope in his eyes. "And?" Claire set down her mug and looked him straight in the eye. "I'll stay in Boston. With you." Carter's face broke into a smile, but before he could say anything, Claire held up her hand. "But I have conditions," she added. "First, I want to finish my rotation at Mass General, and then go back to Chicago for 3 months to wrap things up at the hospital and help find a replacement. Second, I want us to fly to Chicago at least once a quarter for a week. And third," she hesitated, "I want us to treat this as a trial period. If after a year we decide it's not working, we move back to Chicago. Together." Carter looked at her with a mixture of admiration and emotion. "I agree to all of it," he said without hesitation. "But what about your residency?" "I spoke with Dr. Mason. There's a possibility of having the Mass General rotation count toward my specialization. It's complicated but feasible, and if not, then, well, I'll have to start over. But you know what?" She gave a small smile. "It would be worth it." Carter stood up and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You're incredible, you know that?" he whispered in her ear. "The bravest person I know." Claire laughed quietly. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified. But I love you, Carter. And I want to try to build a life with you, here in Boston." Carter pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. I promise you won't regret this decision. I'll do everything I can to make you happy here." "I know," Claire replied softly, "and that's why I decided to stay." He kissed her, and she returned the kiss, feeling her last doubts fade away. This was the right decision. Difficult, but right. "Now go to work," she said, pulling away with a smile. "The investors are waiting for the good news." Carter kissed her one more time, then grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. "I'll be home early," he promised. "We're celebrating tonight." When the door closed behind him, Claire returned to the terrace. The city pulsed with life, and she felt a strange sense of peace. She had made her decision. She would stay in Boston with Carter for at least a year. They would try to build a life together, here, thousands of miles from home. From home. The word suddenly took on a new meaning. Was home a place? Chicago, her apartment in Lincoln Park, the hospital where she worked? Or was it people? Carter, her mother, her brother, her friends. Maybe home is simply where you are loved and where you love, Claire thought. And if that was the case, then maybe her home was here now, in Boston with Carter. 3 months later, Claire was standing at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, waiting for Carter, who was flying in from Boston to spend the holidays with her. As per her conditions, she had returned to Chicago for 3 months to finish her affairs at the hospital and prepare for a longer stay in the States. "I missed you," she said, burying her face in his chest when he finally came through the arrival's gate. "Me too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "These 3 months have been an eternity, but they were necessary," Claire noted. "I needed time to sort everything out, at the hospital, in my head, in my heart." Carter looked at her affectionately. "And? Do you still want to come back to Boston with me after the holidays?" "More than ever," she replied with a smile. "But first, you have to survive Christmas with my family. My mom has prepared a full-on American Christmas dinner for you. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes." "I can't wait," Carter said sincerely, grabbing his suitcase. "Your mom is wonderful and a great cook." Claire laughed, taking his arm. "Yes, but I'm warning you. She's going to grill you with questions about our future plans. She wants to know when you're officially going to make her a mother-in-law." Carter stopped suddenly, giving her a strange look. "What if I told you that might happen sooner than she thinks?" Claire frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Carter looked around, as if searching for the right spot, then pulled her toward a less crowded part of the terminal. He set down his suitcase and took her hands in his. "I had this planned differently," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "A romantic dinner, candles, music, but now that I'm seeing you after these 3 months, I know I don't want to wait another minute." Claire felt her heart pound as Carter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Carter," she whispered, unable to believe what was happening. He knelt before her right there in the middle of the airport, oblivious to the passers-by who were beginning to stop and watch. "Claire Sterling," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "From the moment you sat down at my table that night, I knew you were special. But I had no idea how much you would change my life. I love you for your intelligence, your passion, your courage. I love you for always speaking your mind and for having the guts to follow your dreams. I love you for choosing to be crazy with me on the other side of the world. And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, and building our home with you, whether it's in Boston or Chicago or anywhere else. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. It was so unexpected, so moving, so perfect. A small crowd had gathered around them, travelers, airport staff, all waiting for her answer. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you, Carter." He slipped the ring on her finger as applause and cheers erupted around them. Carter stood up and kissed her, and she returned the kiss, feeling tears of joy stream down her cheeks. "I wasn't expecting," she began when they finally pulled apart. "Good," Carter smiled. "I wanted it to be a surprise." "You succeeded," Claire laughed, admiring the ring on her finger. "It's beautiful, and it's a perfect fit. Maya helped me with the size." Carter admitted. She was in on the plan. So everyone knew but me? Claire shook her head in disbelief. Your mom knows too, Carter confessed. I asked for her blessing, traditionally. Claire felt a fresh wave of emotion wash over her. It was so proper, so Carter, respecting traditions, doing things the right way. I love you, she said, standing on her toes to kiss him, and I can't wait to be your wife. And I, your husband, he replied, holding her tight. They walked out of the airport hand in hand with smiles on their faces and plans for the future in their hearts. Claire knew they still had many challenges ahead, living between two cities, her medical career, their different backgrounds. But she also knew that with Carter by her side, she could face anything, because wherever they were together, that was home. 6 months later, Claire stood in front of a hotel room mirror, adjusting her veil. The wedding dress, simple, elegant, with delicate lace details, fit her perfectly. You look absolutely beautiful, said Maya, her maid of honor and best friend, wiping away a tear. Carter's going to faint when he sees you. Claire laughed nervously. I hope not. It would be hard to say my vows to an unconscious person. Her mother came over, adjusting the veil. My little girl, she said, her own eyes glistening. Your father would have been so proud of you. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. She knew her father would have been happy to see her on this day. Maybe somewhere, somehow, he was watching over her, sharing in her happiness. It's time, her brother said, peeking into the room. He was the one who would walk her down the aisle, taking the place of their absent father. Everyone's waiting. Claire took a deep breath and nodded. She was ready. They had decided to get married in Chicago, in a small, historic church in Old Town, with a reception at an elegant manor outside the city. They wanted to combine tradition with modernity, just as they were combining their two worlds. Hers medical, his business, her Chicago roots, his new Boston life, her modest background, his luxurious one. As Claire walked down the aisle on her brother's arm, she couldn't take her eyes off Carter, who was waiting for her at the altar. He looked so handsome in his dark suit, so happy, so right. It had all happened so fast, Claire thought. Less than a year ago, she didn't even know him, and now she was about to become his wife. If someone had told her back then, that night at Aurelia, when the waiter seated her at the wrong table, that in a year she would be marrying the man she met there, she would have laughed. And yet, here she was, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. When she reached Carter and her brother symbolically placed her hand in his, she saw tears of emotion in her beloved's eyes. You're beautiful, he whispered, squeezing her hand lightly. And you were late, she replied with a smile. What? He frowned, not understanding. To our first meeting, she explained, at the restaurant. If you had arrived earlier, the waiter wouldn't have seated me at your table, and we wouldn't be here today. Carter chuckled softly. In that case, I thank fate for my tardiness, he said, and for the fact that I didn't let you leave my table. And I'm thankful you stopped me, Claire replied. It was the best decision of my life. The priest began the ceremony, and they exchanged vows of love, fidelity, and partnership. As Carter slipped the wedding band onto her finger and she onto his, Claire felt her heart fill with an extraordinary happiness. Later at the reception, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Carter leaned in to whisper in her ear, You know what the best part is? What? She asked, melting into his embrace. That our story is just beginning, and we get to write it together every day for the rest of our lives. Claire lifted her head to look into his eyes. I can't wait for every single chapter, she said, and then she kissed him, ignoring the guests, the photographers, the entire world. Because in that moment, in his arms, she had found her home. And she knew that no matter where their path led them, to Boston, to Chicago, or to the other side of the world, they would always have each other, and that was all they needed. As they looked out at their guests, family, friends, colleagues, they saw a union of two worlds that had once seemed so far apart, the dedicated neurologist and the driven entrepreneur. Two different lives that chance, or fate, had brought together at a single table. And maybe, Claire thought, dancing in her husband's arms, maybe they really were two worlds made to connect. Because despite all the differences, all the challenges, all the miles between them, their love had proven stronger. And it all started with a single sentence. "Excuse me, but I believe you're sitting at my table." And with her decision not to get up.